the number is legion of performers and composers who have tried to put their own personal stamp on music of Bach over the years, especially, with lots of different recordings coming out. Most of them are like adding something to it or doing variations or weird instrumentation or something like that. But you have a completely different approach in the French Suite kit. And I think it's best maybe if you can explain what it is and how it works to our listeners.
Yeah, there are a couple of different approaches to thinking about this. The French Suite kit is, of course, Bach's, in this case, fourth French Suite in E-flat major. And the first way that you might consider it is that these, not really variations, let's just call them alternate versions, are intended to be listened to in whatever way the listener might want to do. So they might want to take version 2 of the first movement, they might want to take version 3 of the second movement, version 1 of the third movement, and so on, to form what I call their ideal kit. Now that's just kind of a fanciful way of approaching it, this idea of an ideal listener putting together what would be their most favorite group of alternate versions. But another way to perhaps view the kit, and one that might be a little bit more standard, would be someone who just wants to listen to all of the various versions that, first of all, are available textually, because these are, in many cases, alternate versions that are actually written by Bach. And then, secondly, to have an approach that's, I've never heard this particular piece that slow, or I've never heard it that fast, or, so forth and so on. Just the idea of variation.
Yeah. I have to say that as both a fan of Bach and a fan of science fiction, this thing really appeals to me because, like you said it, the alternate realities kind of thing. I can easily see somebody sort of, throwing a die and doing a Dungeons and Dragons type thing, or a choose your own adventure in music kind of approach to this. Or just put it on shuffle. And occasionally, I have noticed in my own adventures with this music that the same piece will play twice, only in the different versions. And that is interesting to listen to as well.
Some of those changes are pretty subtle. And like I said, you'd have to be either a music geek or a Bach geek who wanted to really get into the details of, in measure 14, that little figure has changed. I hear that. And so that may not be for everybody, but certainly it's there, and putting it on shuffle, as you suggest, would be a fun way to discover those differences at random.
Yeah, I do. If you don't mind, I just want to play a couple of quick snippets here so folks at home can actually hear what we're talking about. This Allemande, which is a piece that I played back in the day, although my interpretation probably tends towards the much, much slower version than what you have here. The first version is fairly quick. Now, if we go back and listen to the fourth version, I believe, that you have of it, it's remarkably slower. So, yeah, everybody can hear that difference, obviously. That's one of those differences that really stands out. It puts me a little bit in mind of Glenn Gould. I know you have a Glenn Gould connection to this whole idea. And you look at his 55 recording of the Goldberg and his 81 recording of the Goldberg, and the tempo changes and the weight that he gives to different notes is very different.
Yeah, it's interesting to actually think about that in terms of if he had recorded those, more contemporaneously and had put them back to back in any way. I'm not sure why he would have wanted to do that.
Yeah.
But in my case, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, is to try to not really to highlight the differences, but just to see what other potentials exist in the music.
Yeah, what is the inspiration that you found in Glenn Gould initially that I read in your program notes? Can you tell us about that a little bit?
That really has to do with, he was such a deep thinker about all the changes that were occurring in our world from the early 50s onward in terms of technology and its effect on music. I think he would be fascinated, if he were still alive, to see all of the changes that have happened with recording technology. But he actually predicted many of them, and one of them was this idea of what he called a new listener, one who was more involved in the listening process. Of course, we have now with technology the ability to do everything from taking recorded pieces and stems and remixing them to our own heart's delight. And that's not quite what we're talking about here. But simply having more of an active role in the listening process, not just taking the single version that an artist presents as Holy Gospel, but trying different approaches and then putting them together in a way that they see as fitting for the best for their ear.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the meeting the listener halfway, as it were. What does a listener need to bring with them to this experience?
In my view, very little except the idea of what pleases them. So much is talked about, especially in terms of Bach or early music, in terms of authenticity, and I'm not interested in that at all. And I don't think the listener necessarily should be. They should simply approach this project anyway as something that, I like the way this goes together with that, and that's enough.
Yeah. It is fascinating, though, I have to say. You have a website, which is thefrenchsuitekit.com, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And you have annotations for all of your different interpretations of those tracks. It's fascinating for somebody who, like myself, who, loves Bach, admires Bach, and knows a lot of the Bach repertoire, but I really don't know, the technical details behind how one chooses to interpret it one way or the other. And you have a lot of that information that people can digest. So it's not like you're just kind of improvising different versions. You've really thought this through.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Although I want the effect and the pleasure, the enjoyment to be one that is improvisatory in terms of just the nature of music and having it be fresh and not perhaps heard in quite that way before. So I like that sense of it. But no, it's all very carefully thought through in terms of at least approach. And as I said before, these textual variations that exist, I wanted to make sure that everything I could find was available in the kit because, to my knowledge, with very few exceptions, a lot of these things don't actually occur in the recorded literature. There are a couple of versions available of live recordings. Richter, for example, recorded the Prelude and his recitals, and that has shown up on record. But it's very, very difficult to find other performers who have played it. And as I mentioned in those liner notes, there are other textual versions which, to my knowledge, don't appear in the recorded literature at all.
Yeah. And speaking of the recorded literature, I mean, many pianists, if not most pianists, while they may record a piece at different times in their career, they always seem to be striving to create like their perfect version. I mean, we know that Glenn Gould, wanted to be in the recording studio so he could have complete control. You've kind of given sort of a bit of control over to the audience here, and I'm wondering, is there a definitive version of this piece for you, or are you just leaving it open to your audience?
Well, my approach was always to take the first version put on disc as what I'm calling my baseline. So there is a way. I've been involved and played and heard this piece for so many decades now in my career that I have a way that I sort of hear it as the fundamental version. That, by the way, is not always an uncontroversial version. It might be something that's a little bit strange to some ears, but still, it's my the basis from which I try the other variations. So I'm not sure if that answers your question exactly, but there is a way that I hear it, but I also like the idea of trying other things, both to challenge myself and, of course, to challenge the ear of the listener.
Did you have any other pianists specifically in your ear when you were going through these variations?
Well, there's one in particular. There's a recording by a pianist who's, I don't know how well known he is. He's mostly an organist, but he's recorded quite a bit of Bach on the piano. His name is Wolfgang Rubsam. And I just think he's wonderful. I just love his approach. He always does something fresh and lovely. And one of the pieces in the kit is a direct homage to him, really, because it's almost exactly as the way he plays it. There are differences, of course. I can't play it exactly the way he does. But I joke in my liner notes that if I could have just gotten the copyright and put his version in my kit, I probably would have done.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about the French suite itself. I mean, that's not a name that Bach knew this piano suite by, or set of suites by.
Sure. Yeah. No, he didn't. He didn't apply these names, French suite, English suite, to any of his works. So it is anecdotal, but they are in what was known as the French style, broadly speaking, and that means almost nothing because, in fact, and I include this as well in my liner notes, each of the movements has almost piece by piece a different nationalistic heritage. Some are from Germany, some are from France, some have Italian origin. And so all of these, which are dances, by the way, have this sort of hodgepodge melange of different nationalisms coming into play. And French was just a broad kind of approach to what was the style galant, or the French style of the time.
Yeah. Why did you choose this particular volume to begin with?
This volume is actually interesting because it's the first, not just the first French suite I ever learned, it was the first piece by Bach I ever learned. I didn't start, as many pianists do, with the two-part inventions or something from Anna Magdalena's notebook. No, I found this piece and I heard it, and that's the one I wanted to start with. So I came to Bach fairly late in my pianistic life, and this was the first one that I came to. So I really have not only a long history with it, but a long emotional attachment to it, and a lot of ideas about, obviously, different ways in which it can be played.
Yeah. I think people would be interested to know a little bit about your activities, not only as a performer, but as a composer as well, because we've been talking about Bach, but your interests extend beyond just the classical canon, right?
Yeah, well, it would be probably incorrect to call me a performer. I'm not a performing piano player.
Okay.
I don't give recitals. I don't. I'm more of an embodiment of the Gould approach to rather than giving up the concert stage, I just never went into it, which is kind of a different approach.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm not a performing player. I love to craft things in my studio, and I love them to really reflect my ideas as best as I can realize them in the recorded medium. So there's that. And then in terms of composition, as you mentioned, yeah, I'm involved mostly, in fact, right now, quite heavily in compositional work for film and shorts and hopefully ballet. That's what I'm most interested in doing right now, is realizing a few of the ballets that I have on the palette.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I guess, that blows my whole idea of taking this on the road and doing a recital where the audience gets to pick and choose which movements you do as you go along.
Oh, it would be a marvelous idea for a piano player who is well-versed in all of the things that are required to perform live in recital. That's a whole world of its own and requires many years of dedication to that. So probably a little late in my life for that kind of approach.
Well, you can always patent the process and license it out.
That might be the way to do it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful approach. It's called the French Suite Kit, and there's a website, thefrenchsuitekit.com. You can go listen to the whole thing there, and also, as I mentioned, read the annotations from the composer and the performer, in this case, Craig Swanson. Really wonderful recording here, and I've enjoyed our conversation. I'm so glad that you had some time to spend with us here on FM 91.
Thank you, Brad, for having me. I really appreciate it.